So now I get to introduce our celebrity co-host for this Live with an Author event. And Bill, if you want to, show yourself as I tell people how incredible you are, this person has been an advocate for early learning for many years, and specifically has been a strong supporter of both Jumpstart and Raising a Reader Massachusetts. He was the executive chairman for higher education at Pearson, and the publishing company Pearson, of which Penguin is a division, and specifically of which Putnam is a division of Penguin. And that is all by way of saying that he knows Ace well from the publishing world. They are both very big lovers of dogs, and there's a story about dogs that maybe they'll share with us. I would like to officially welcome our co-host for today. Would you please all give a cheer for Bill Barke? Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Ian, and welcome from Plymouth, Massachusetts. And I'm here today to introduce Ace Atkins in Oxford, Mississippi. Ace Atkins, despite his youth, short of 50, has actually written almost 30 books. Now, most of them in the crime and mystery genre. Ace has actually been nominated for an Edgar Award twice. Prior to writing books, Ace was a crime reporter for the Tampa Tribune, where he was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. But despite all of his writing, Ace did not grow up in a family of literature. Ace grew up in a family of football, and he himself was a defensive end for the undefeated Auburn football team of the 90s. So Ace, I know I've always been interested, and I'm sure that our listeners are interested in, what is the process? How did it happen that you migrated from the world of football to the world of literature? So take us back from the beginning.
Well, you
and
set me up with...
welcome, and
thank you, and good to be here. I've been actually working on a new Spencer book right now, so I feel like I've been living virtually in Boston for the last few weeks. So it's great to be linking up with all my Boston pals. But yeah, so I just have always loved books. You're asking me about how I got started being a writer, how I got into books, and it really does start off with being a kid and getting a book put in your hand and actually falling in love with escapism. And I think right now we're obviously fighting all types of distractions for kids. I have 2 young kids of my own, and they're on their iPad and they're playing video games. But we try to choose a time during the day when they are reading a physical book, when they have a book in hand. And we try to find something that's specific to their tastes, something that they're going to get engaged in. But that love of reading, that appreciation of reading, and letting the kids know that reading is not something that's being forced on you. It's not eating your vegetables. It's something that makes you stronger. And that's what I tell my own boys. I tell them, I said, it's like lifting weights. I said, a book is like lifting weights for your mind. And so getting those books in the hands of children is just immensely important as a parent. And also I respect so much what you guys are doing with Raising a Reader.
So Ace, during your college days or football days, and before that, what were some of the specific books that you were drawn to, you were reading for inspiration?
Sure. I mean, I was very fortunate to go to some really wonderful schools that I remember. My father, as you mentioned, growing up in a football family, worked for the NFL. So we lived in a variety of major cities. And I remember being around 8 or 9 years old and living in Michigan, outside Detroit. My dad was coaching for the Lions. And, a few times during the week, we got to go to the library at the school. And going to the library at the school was such a great thing because you were able to take a new book out, bring back the book that you had, exceed what's out there. And that was something that was very special. It's something that the kids really look forward to. But I remember reading stuff, very early on, or not necessarily just reading, but having the teachers read to us as a class. And I remember the early stuff was like reading about historical figures and people that, I'd heard about, but reading little biographies. I remember being in Detroit and hearing stories about, George Washington, and you'd read about the founding fathers. But at the same time, we read a book I remember very well when I was 8 or 9 years old about Harriet Tubman. And I remember learning about the days of the Underground Railroad, and that was something I didn't know anything about, and being inspired by those stories and finding really what I think the core of what reading is all about, and what's important for all of us to read, whether you're a kid or especially as an adult, is really having empathy and also understanding people in different parts of history or different parts of the world. I think that's really what makes us all hopefully understand each other.
When did you get into your Judy Blume thing?
Oh, Judy Blume was, you can't be in 3rd or 4th grade without coming across Judy Blume. And I think that was one of the first times when reading a work of fiction, not reading a biography, that I discovered that books could be fun and books could be funny. They weren't stuff that, again, that were forced upon you. There was stuff that you could read for absolute enjoyment. And I think that's, on a fiction side, that's what Judy Blume taught to me. And I was very fortunate 2 years ago to be doing a book event, and Judy Blume was there. And I told her, I said, I don't really get very excited meeting authors, I meet authors all the time. It's not really a highlight, but I said, meeting Judy Blume was like reaching a rock star. And I think that Judy Blume, for me, what she means is, you think about, I'm very fortunate to have a fan base of readers who have been following Spencer for many years, or my own Quinn Coulson books. But you think about somebody like Judy Blume, what she does, where she reaches young people in 3rd or 4th grade, and she hooks them on books. And I think that there's really few things that are more important, and she has to be very proud of that.
You mentioned Spencer and you mentioned Quinn Coulson. Let's talk about those two main projects of yours. They're a little bit different, and we'll be able to talk about what is different about them. But here's an author in Oxford, Mississippi, who attracts the attention of Putnam editors in New York to write about a detective in Boston, Massachusetts. Tell us a little bit about how that happened.
I've always been, talk about books that really hooked you. I had always been a fan of Robert B. Parker. And of course, Robert B. Parker's name is synonymous with Boston. He's so deeply tied in with that city. And being a teenager, I came across reading Spencer, and Spencer impacted my life as a young man in many different ways. Most notably, Spencer talks about, being a stand-up person, being a gentleman, appreciating what's good in life. For him, also valuing people of different races and different creeds. That's all in Robert Parker. And being a 16, 17-year-old kid, reading this stuff, it made a great impact on me, not only wanting to be a writer and the kind of writer I wanted to be as far as a crime writer, but also the kind of person that I wanted to grow up and be. And he affected me in a lot of different ways. And so when it came to me, if I would be interested in continuing on this iconic series for the Parker estate, I was overjoyed. And, for the last 10 years, it's given me this great relationship with the city of Boston. And I've been up to Boston countless times, visiting you, being at, at events here for Raising the Reader. And for me, that's been one of the great highlights of it all, being able to get to know people in Boston and have many friends there.
I know a little bit about that process that I'd like you to share with the group. So Ace is your nickname, and of course your name is William. You two are Bill Atkins, and your father's name was Billy Atkins, the coach and the player in the NFL. What is it about Ace that was sort of significant when you became the successor to Robert Parker? What about the name Ace?
Well, this story was told to me by the late Joan Parker, who is a wonderful friend of mine and taught me a lot about carrying on the mantle and carrying on the idea of Spencer and what this meant to readers and what what this job entailed, and just really about the writing in general. I learned a lot from Joan. Joan was wonderful, but what she said to me is she had gotten manuscripts from different people, and this was maybe some of the manuscripts were solicited, unsolicited, people that were coming in when they knew that the family was going to be continuing on the novels. She said that she was just overwhelmed when she saw one of the manuscripts that had been sent to her through Putnam, through the legitimate channels, had the name Ace on it, because Robert Parker, to Joan and to his close friends, had been known as Ace Parker. So she thought it was just very fateful that somebody named Ace would be taking over the series.
That's fateful indeed. All right, so how many Spencer novels now have we written?
Actually, as right before I jumped on here with you guys, I am working on the 48th Spencer, And I'm looking forward to carrying on this series going up until what will be, in a couple of years, the 50th Spencer novel. And so this series has been going on about as long as I've been alive.
And how many have you contributed to that number now?
I'm working on number 9 right now.
Wow, that is amazing in a very short time. So let's forget about Angel Eyes, the one that's on the shelf, which is set in Los Angeles. That's for a different time, maybe. Well, where is the new Spencer going to be set? In what part of Boston?
It's all Boston. It's all Boston. I didn't want to have
And
to
which
travel.
neighborhoods of Boston are featured in the new?
Well, I mean, so much of, for those who are watching this that follow Spencer, you know, of course, Spencer's office is in the Back Bay. A lot of action happens downtown. Part of this particular story is going to be, part of it's taking place in Southie. And so it's got a little bit connection with some of the characters that I've written about in the past that have ties to that community. So it, you know, Spencer gets all over Boston. He's all over the place, and that gives me an opportunity to write about the different neighborhoods and get to know the different people. And I can't believe I've been doing this now for almost 10 years.
So you have to do research to know Boston a little bit. So tell us a little bit about a day in the life of Ace Atkins doing research in Boston.
Well, you know, I could really, you know, I could say that it was a lot of, you know, in-depth work at the public library, and I'm going through microfilm. But what it, you know, part of the great thing for readers of Spencer is the restaurants, the bars, you know, the community. And so, you know, when I land at Logan, I'm hitting, you know, the new restaurants. I want to see what's going on. You know, if there's a new beer out there, of course, I've got to try that. But, you know, it has brought me, all that kidding aside, has brought me into contact with some really wonderful people. A few years ago, I did a story that was involving the Boston Fire Department, and I got to know some wonderful people that worked with the fire department. I got to know the commissioner. He was able to take me around. I got to meet some arson investigators. And so it's things like that. And that's what one of the best things about Boston is it's a small town, and it's what I would call like a one phone call town. Is you meet somebody, and if they like you, they'll look out for you, and they'll introduce you to a friend. And everyone has been so incredibly warm and welcoming during this whole process of writing about Boston to a guy who is not a native, somebody who's a Southerner. They've really opened their doors in offices to me.
Well, you're both foodies and you're both music lovers, and food includes donuts. Now, I don't think that Robert Parker Spencer's went to the same donut shops that you're going to, right? You've added a few new ones to the mix?
Yeah, Bob was, you know, kind of, I would say historically a Dunkin' guy. You know, he was a Dunkin' guy, and not not until like I got to Boston do I realize, you know, why you're a Dunkin' guy, because there's a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner. But as I've been in Boston, I got, I guess, a more specialized palate. And I've got a good friend of mine, it's a very strange world, ended up moving his family from Boston to Oxford, Mississippi. So it was kind of the reverse of me. And he said, you got to try this place called Cane's Donuts that was in Saugus. And for me, you know, once I had a Cane's donut, you know, that was it, you know, and I was so happy when they opened up in the financial district and I could go over to Cane's. And to me, that's like donut heaven.
And then music, there's a lot of music in Parker Spencer, and he listens to music quite a bit. And how about yourself when you're writing those novels?
Yeah, and Bill, you and I have talked personally countless times about the kind of music that we enjoy, you know, blues and rock and roll and classic jazz. And Parker did too. Parker was definitely, and through that Spencer, a big jazz guy. And I probably, being from Mississippi, am tied in a little bit more with blues music, very close to New Orleans with, you know, early days of jazz. But, you know, I do try to follow, you know, really what Bob appreciated, which was, you know, things from the Great American Songbook and Hoagie Carmichael. And, you know, he loved, you know, listening to Tony Bennett or Frank Sinatra and that kind of world. And of course, we have a mutual friend with Ron Della Chiesa, who's a wonderful guy who actually Parker would mention in his books, listening to his radio show. So that's really, I think, what provides the soundtrack to Spencer. And when I'm working on the Spencer, as I am right now, not only am I thinking about Boston, but, you know, I'm listening to Duke Ellington, you know, and I'm listening to Ella Fitzgerald. That's very Spencerish.
And Boston's Dave McKenna as well. So let's move a little bit to your own series, the Quinn Coulson series. set in a different place. I would like, you know, a lot of people don't know you're a big movie freak. I kind of know that. You're always watching movie, and you're a motion picture historian. As a way of introducing Quinn Coulson, what are the movies that inspired? Can you think of some movies that inspired your Quinn Coulson books?
Well, you know, the genesis of writing these books, for lack of a better term, they're really kind of hero-driven books, you know, where you have a strong central character, somebody you're following from book to book. And, you know, there really wasn't somebody in the Deep South, where I'm originally from and where I've lived now, that kind of was this area's Spencer. And so I was very drawn to characters that kind of were, you know, sticking it to the establishment and sticking it to the, you know, the corrupt powers. And there were movies that were very popular in the 1970s, movies like Walking Tall with Joe Don Baker, where you had a complete, you know, town of corruption that it took, you know, one honest man to take it down. There was a great noir film in the 50s called The Phoenix City Story, about a town that I've written about extensively called Phoenix City, Alabama, that was a completely, you know, overrun town with vice and corruption and killers, and it was about taking down that. And so I like those kind of movies, and I like the fact that, you know, let's face it, I mean, both Boston and the Deep South, you know, have had their share of struggles, both with, you know, racial injustice, but also with corruption, and, you know, these are kind of endless. So I feel like these stories and these kind of heroes really are very similar. There's a very similar worldview with both of them. They may have a slightly different accent, but for the most part, hopefully they're men of honor.
So tell us specifically where the Quinn Coulson books are set.
My books, where I'm coming to you now, is from North Mississippi. I'm very close to Memphis. I'm right outside Memphis. And so that's really where this world is. It's the world of the North Mississippi Hill Country, which is kind of a mostly rural, kind of, you know, rough and tumble terrain that's up here. I live in Oxford, Mississippi, which is a college town, which is a much different kind of place than the world I write about in the Quinn books, which is a place called Tibahaw County, Mississippi, which is a much more hardscrabble rural environment. But it's, you know, it's very familiar. It's, you know, again, I've lived a lot of different places. I've visited a lot of different places, but this is specifically home to me and home to my family for generations. And so these characters that I'm writing about are very accurate, very real. And, you know, I hope these books, in the way that Parker did with his books and what I try to do with the Spencer books, continue to address issues of corruption and racial injustice, societal ills. I mean, that's really what these books are about at their core. And I think that that's hopefully what makes them more than just, you know, entertaining reads. I hope they make people think.
So I just got a question from a reader. I know the answer, but the reader wants to know, the listener wants to know, the viewer wants to know. Did you know Robert Parker personally?
I did know Bob. We had exchanged letters when I first started writing. I had been a longtime admirer of his books. And when I was a young newspaper reporter and I was just starting to write novels, write books, he provided a blurb for my very first novel. And I've got these wonderful letters back and forth with Mr. Parker. But I never met him in person. We just exchanged letters. But I was very, very close to his wife, the late Joan Parker. She was a wonderful friend, and she was a terrific for people in Boston, a wonderful philanthropist that raised a lot of money for a lot of great causes there, and really did some amazing work on her own. And through her and through another guy, another mutual friend of ours, Bill, a man named Mel Farman, who is Bob's best friend, I really feel like I've got to know him in that way.
And yes, you did. So a little bit about Oxford. I think everybody knows, or most people know, there are quite a few authors who find living in Oxford, you know, to be beneficial to their craft. And there's sort of peer-to-peer things. Do you sort of routinely sort of gain from some of your fellow authors, exchange some strategies, talk about the business, and how you're getting screwed out of royalties and things like this together?
It's called Bill, that's called happy hour. That's what that's called. You know, when I first moved here, one of the things that drew me to Oxford, of course, it's the home of William Faulkner, arguably the greatest American novelist of all time. And a link going back to Parker again was he was Robert Parker's favorite writer. But when I moved here in the early 2000s, there were two famous writers who were living here. There was Barry Hannah, who was this wonderful writer, master of the short story, and Larry Brown, who did very rural noir. And when I first got here to Oxford in the 2000s, I was so fortunate to meet those guys, and they got to be very good friends of mine. And it had been right at the time that previous to that, there's some guy I'm sure none of you guys have heard of called John Grisham, who was here. He's sold a few books. Who's a really terrific guy, and I've gotten to be a friend of mine as well. And also Willie Morris. But as the years have gone on, more and more writers have been here, and we're very fortunate. I mean, last count, I think we have at least a dozen nationally known authors that are working here in Oxford, and we are good friends, and we do converse. But the only thing that's different about what you asked is we talk about anything but the book business. It's too depressing.
Yes, and I'm not going to ask you what anything is either.
Yeah.
So we'll leave that for others. So I really want to thank you personally, Ace. I know we don't really talk about this very often, but you have been an advocate not only for Raising a Reader, but also for Jumpstart. And you, like I, are a big exponent of early literacy. You've been to 3 Raising a Reader galas. What is it about you that makes you want to help organizations like Raising a Reader?
Well, I think, probably on a very selfish level, Bill, if we're not raising new readers and we're not getting people involved, my business, I'm out of business. If we're not having people, and we do see that, with the times we're living in and with generations coming up, people don't read as much as they used to. And I'm talking about adults. The idea of running, is someone going to pop on Netflix, or are they going to pick up a book? So the more that we have people reading books, that's good. That's good for me on a business thing. But on a personal front, I mean, it is fantastic getting books to young kids. And I do have a lot of hope for the future that I think kids that have grown up with technology or have grown up with the idea that there are all different kinds of things that can be distractions to them, that reading in a book is a safe haven for them. It's a place they can go. It's a place they can quiet their mind. It's a place they can learn. It's a quiet space. And I think these days we really need a quiet space more than ever. I mean, the world is a noisy place. There's too much going on. But I think there's nothing better than when I see kids, either my own or other kids, picking out books. And I see that here in Oxford, Mississippi. We have a great kids bookstore here called Square Junior. And you see the delight of the kids go in with their parents and come out with a book. But I also am aware through Raising a Reader and other organizations that other kids don't have that luxury of having parents take them to the bookstore and buy them books. And that's what's so important about what you guys do.
That's great. Glad to hear. Jumping back a little bit, to the protagonist of Quinn Coulson. So he's not listening to Hoagie Carmichael, and he's not listening to Dave McKenna. What is Quinn Coulson listening to?
It is so different. I think you can tell a lot about a person or get a feel of them through their taste in music. And this series is very inspired, I would say, the classic American country music. And I'm not talking about what's being played right now on the FM radio and XM and that kind of stuff as far as pop music, but Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, and that's the kind of music that really makes up the backbeat of Quinn Coulson. And I do really do this when I'm switching characters. For me, I was trying to get into the mindset of Spencer the other day, and I'm listening to Duke Ellington, and it really grounds me and has that proper feel and the right rhythm for the language that I want to achieve in those books. But when I get into writing Quinn Coulson, I'm listening to Waylon Jennings, and I'm listening to Hank Williams, and I'm being drawn to those kind of that sound, because that's what I want it to feel like on the pages.
Hey, sorry, Bill, I'm going to interrupt only because I want to hear what you just said, and you were talking, but then you were muted. So just roll back.
I am
Perfect.
unmuted.
There you go.
And I was simply agreeing with Ace. We'll go from there. And I was about to say that there's another commonality between Spencer and Quinn Coulson and Ace Atkins, and that is their love of dogs. So those who have read the Spencer novels know that one of the main characters of the Spencer novels is Ace. Tell us about that furry main character.
You know, you couldn't have Spencer without his trusty dog Pearl. You know, it's kind of like Asta in the old Thin Man movies, you know, with William Powell. You have to, you know, people love that, the relationship between the detective and his canine buddy. And that's Pearl, the German short-haired pointer, in all the Spencer books. And for me, and as for you, Bill, too, we're big dog lovers. We've both been involved with dog rescue. And you know, I could not write, I could not work without my own dog, and who you have heard all about, Bill, and of course I know your dog Dixie very well, also.
So we're about ready to share with our viewers right now. I'm looking for my dog. So
Mine is asleep right now.
So everybody wake up. Ace's dog Maureen is our dog Dixie's mother.
That's right.
And they've been separated for over 5 years, and we are about to reunite them right now. So,
hey,
Maureen, let us have a look at Maureen. Dixie,
Real.
come on over here. Come on over here. Come on. Can you sit up?
Ian, this is when our show goes to chaos right here.
Here's Bill.
So this is Maureen.
There is
Maureen. A wonderful flat-coated retriever, just the best, most wonderful dog. And let's see Dixie there, Bill.
Dixie, I'm trying to get Dixie. I'm not having as much luck as you are, because Dixie was there's Dixie. So, Dixie, get up or down. Come on. You know what? This is not working for you. So,
you know what they say now?
I think
you work with dogs here on a live TV show right now.
That's right. I mean, Ace, I know that you recently had some experience in Hollywood, and I believe that the dog didn't make it into the movie. Is that right?
Well, there was a big difference for those of you who watched Spencer Confidential, which was shot in Boston, the Wahlberg film. It was on, there it is right there. It was on Netflix earlier this year and has done very well, and hopefully will bring new readers to the series. But no, there was a Pearl, but it was not the Pearl from the books. So there was a lot of Hollywood changes to the.
It was a beagle.
Story.
The beagle was actually a pretty good canine actor.
Yeah, no, I was not a bad. The beagle was good. The beagle was good, but I think people. They definitely took a lot of liberties with the story. It's based on the second book that I did, second Spencer book called Wonderland, which was, of course, for those of you in Boston, set all around the old Wonderland dog track in Revere. But for some reason, this story took place in Southeast, so I don't know. The geography was all over the place as far as Boston, but, it's always a good thing to hopefully maybe get some new readers to the Spencer series. So hopefully it did get that going.
Well, Ace, I want to thank you again on behalf of everybody involved with Raising a Reader for becoming part of this series. I have one final question. It's probably the most important question of the evening. What does the M stand for on your ball cap?
Well, that is a very good question. So Spencer and Bob Parker would always wear a Boston Braves cap. And the old Boston Braves team before they moved to Milwaukee and then to Atlanta. The Braves now have a farm team in Mississippi. So now Spencer wears a Mississippi Braves cap as opposed to the Boston Braves cap. So that's one of the little subtle changes, just a little in joke, but I always wear the Mississippi Braves cap.
Well, somebody else needs a Mississippi Brave cap too as well.
We can work on that.
Well, let's do work on it. That's it, Ian. Back to you. Thanks again, Ace. Appreciate you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for all the good work to all you guys and everything you guys do. Proud to be part of it.
No, thank you all. And Bill, do you mind if Ace? Can I ask you one question? One other reading-related question.
Sure.
So, I had no idea, but it makes so much sense that you really put yourself in a place when you're writing about. I mean, obviously, you have characters that are so. Located in a place and time, and the way you talked about listening, to the music, depending on if you're writing Spencer or Quill. And I'm curious, when you were a child reading Judy Blume, what was the music or place, and who were those people that kind of made that space for you? Like, what are your earliest memories reading, in terms of like the whole picture?
Of just the whole image of where I would have been reading.
Yeah, like,
I think I have,
where would you have been? What would you have been listening to, or what would somebody else have been listening to? Like when you were a young reader, because as we work with young readers, we know that it's important that reading has to happen in a place often with people, especially when you're first learning to read.
I think.
What was that for you?
I think for me, the two places when I really think about developing a love for books, and as you can see behind me, this is not even a 5% of my book collection. It was really about getting some space for myself. And I think sometimes kids don't get that enough. So being in my room, and being left alone. I mean, there's no better excuse for a kid to say to their parent that, hey, I'm reading, leave me alone, And so I remember being in my room with, how old I am, a kid of the 70s with my Star Wars figures and NFL pennants and whatever, and reading. But then again, libraries too. I mean, the school library, I was very fortunate. Again, not all kids get this opportunity. I had this wonderful opportunity to go to this great school that had a very well-funded library. And so there was never a time that I couldn't go in and pick out a new book. There was never a time that there wasn't a librarian saying, here, read this. There's this exciting new book that's coming out. And so that was the great fortune that I had. But I'm also very aware that a lot of kids don't have that opportunity because it does take the librarian, not always the parent, but a special teacher. I had this one teacher in 5th grade. She used to read this book to us called The Westing Game, which was a mystery for kids. And it blew my mind. And every day, these kids, we couldn't wait until it was, 1:30 in the afternoon after we'd have lunch, and we'd come in and that teacher would be reading us The Westing Game. And so that, where the red fern grows, all of that stuff. But again, it took somebody to put that in my hand, and it's sometimes, like I said, it's the parent, but a lot of times it's the teacher.
Yeah. And I mean, I have to share with you that my mom was the librarian at my elementary school. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, after school, I had to go to the library, whether I liked it or not, because I had to go hang out with my mom until work was done. But I think importantly, Raising a Reader Massachusetts is doing that exact thing that you're talking about for kids who might not have that coming from somewhere else, and not just for kids, but really for families, to invite parents and kids to get to hang out with books.
Well, what you guys do to make it a special thing and to make it something that is exciting, just with the red bag, of just the visual image that I see with kids getting a red bag, of how exciting that is, of having a gift for them, something that's special for them. And that's, I think, what the core of everything for making people lifelong readers, and I think reading eventually makes you better human beings, is to enjoy it, to love it, to have the association that is something fun. And I can't imagine what that probably does for those kids to get a prize like that coming in and to see what that new book is. That just builds in a positive reinforcement. And I think that's what we all want for everybody. And God knows, for me, I don't trust adults, and I do meet them, not a lot, but a lot of adults that say they don't like to read. They find it something like a chore. And we see that a lot, Bill. I know you and I see that a lot with men and older men. They don't want to read. They want to sit down and vegetate over television or whatever. But I think the world would be a much better place. Again, it goes back to what we originally discussed, which is reading about different cultures, different people, different creeds, races, everything. It makes you empathetic. And that's what we're really obviously sorely lacking these days.
Yeah, and hopefully finding more these days. Well, thank you. I hope people were taking notes, because what you just said, Ace, reading makes you a better person. Like, I mean, that to me, that kind of like sums it up. I want to invite back, because I know I'm watching the time, and I have to, we're all here, under her auspices. So I want to invite back our executive director, Christine Ward. So Christine, hi. Oh.
Oh, she's going to have her dog. Dixie.
It's a reunion.
Poor Dixie is unseen.
She's resting on the bed. I saw her.
So what's the name? What's the name of that?
Because my kids are soccer players, so they named him after the famous soccer player Pele.
Oh, great.
Labradoodle. I'm sure you'll meet your dogs one of these days. But Ace, I can't thank you enough for joining us for our, Live with an Author. You were such a wonderful author to share your time with us. And
My pleasure.
I love what you said about, reading is like exercise for the mind. I often think of Raising a Reader Massachusetts as being a personal trainer for early literacy. So I love what you said. And I also enjoy reading your stories and all the action in Boston, and I prefer it much more in your books than seeing the action seen recently on our precious Boston streets here. But thank you so much. I think I don't want to take too much time, as you did such a nice job of sharing the importance of reading, but I just want to reiterate again that now more than ever, families need the comfort and joy that books provide. So please help us with this critical early literacy opportunity gap, and thank you for your support.
And before we all say goodbye, there's two important pieces of information I need to share with everyone who's with us this evening. One, we are gathering again on Thursday, which is unusual, but it's of course part of the fact that we canceled last Tuesday. So Ben Mesrick is going to be with us on Thursday, the 11th, as in 2 days from now. And he's going to be sharing about his new project. And also we're going to be awarding the Creative Writing Challenge award that started when Ben and Tanya were with us on our first Live with an Author. So that will be very exciting. And I know Ace and Bill, you already spoke about it, but our Dinner with an Author Gala, which is our big annual fundraiser, is happening on October 15th. We are going to have an amazing group of authors with us, and it's going to be a virtual event to remember. So we just want to remind people about that. Thank you. I just want to say to everyone who has been with us this afternoon, evening, and for all your support of Raising a Reader Massachusetts. There's some great links in the chat that you can check out to find more of our resources for families and kids. So thank you, Bill. It's such a pleasure. Ace, incredible pleasure and honor. Thank you, and goodbye to everybody else.
Thank you, Ian. Nice job.
Ciao.
Thanks, guys.